Please we welcome Gabby and Vix.
Yeah, so when this question got put to me and Gabby to try and answer, I guess we kept coming back to the same theme about how there was just a fundamental barrier in AV and digital about how we can target the 50 pluses, 55 pluses. And the theme's kind of been through this whole presentation as well about how we put these people in a box and that we're putting arguably the mum and the nan generation in the same box. Now, I know if I said that to my mum, she wouldn't be too chuffed. So it doesn't really make sense for us to be doing it in our media planning as well. So we kind of wanted to address that and start to put pressure on the industry to allow us to target beyond just this 55 plus bucket. We can do 55 to 64 within Barb data, but beyond that, 65 pluses are all put into the same bucket, and I know it's the same for digital. And I got the clicker to work. So we dug into this a little bit more, looking at media consumption across the different channels. Now, as you can see, out-of-home TV, radio, they're fairly similar in their consumption. Unsurprisingly, the older audience a little bit higher in terms of reach you can drive there. But we start to see the disparity once we get to social media, broadcast VOD, subscription VOD services, direct mail, online video, etc.
Cool. So when I was asked to present today as the head of digital operations, I thought I was being massively set up to fail, talking about digital to targeting over 50s. But hopefully, I'm going to convince you with some data here that digital is relevant to this audience. So we can see here, like we've taken this thread of mums and grandmums, because if you think about your own personal lives and your mums and your grandmothers, they are completely and utterly different people. They behave differently. They use the internet differently. They read different titles and that kind of thing. So we can see here, if we focus in on the mums, what is particularly interesting to see is social media, quite high there. We're looking at almost 80% or each of the audience. And this was particularly interesting to me as an individual because 10 years ago when I started in this industry as a digital buyer, I was told you can't reach over 50s on the internet. You can only buy specifically against certain websites, and that was it. But the reality is they are much closer to buying habits of 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds than you realise. If we then go into the next slide, and we focus in on grandmums, we can see here on the right-hand side, there begins to be a bit of a disparity in that age bracket, showing there is a lot of nuance in over 50s. They are consuming more direct mail, more online video, and more press. And then bringing it back to digital in particular, with the online video, social media, the number of over 75s that are actively engaged online has doubled over the last 5-6 years or so. And that is a trend that is only going to increase as people who have been exposed to digital media platforms for longer then age into the bracket. So it shouldn't be disregarded. Even though numbers may be smaller than others, it is an increasing trend that we have.
But as has been the theme throughout this presentation, we can't deny that TV is still king for the 55 plus audiences. We can see here that 94% of 55 to 65s are reached, and that goes up to 95% once you look at 75 to 85-year-olds. Now, I think a really interesting way to look at this is talking cost per cover. We're painfully aware in the AV team that viewing is diversifying, and we have to move with that trend. So we quite like to look now at, we know we can build cover quickly, but at what point do we need to start layering in different channels? If we were looking at this chart on the right-hand side for 25 to 44s, for example, which we do for some of our clients, we would get to a point where we would need to be layering in other channels much sooner. We'd be getting to a cost per cover of between 30 and 35, buying 400 to 500 ratings on TV. As you can see from that chart, we're up to 1,500 ratings for 50 plus adults, and we've still not got to that point. So there's so much headroom within TV to be able to reach this audience. We also know that TV's super effective in driving emotion. We saw from the creative guys talking earlier about how we know emotional response ultimately leads to your brand being memorable, and TV gives you the best opportunity to do that. It's a big screen, sound on, all the things we know and love about TV, as well as the trust that comes alongside it. So we know it's king. But, as I say, putting everybody into 55 plus bracket is very dangerous, because if I dug into this a little bit more, we can see that and from what Rick was talking about earlier, if the average age of retirement is 65 plus, it's not surprising that the viewing habits of these people below 65 is very different from those above, because the reality is they're not just sitting watching TV, as some of TV buyers would maybe lead you to believe, over 55. So I broke this out because I thought this was a really interesting way to demonstrate it in terms of the top programming for these two audiences. So looking back in 2022, the top programs for adults 55 to 64, unsurprisingly, the World Cup did great, 30 TVRs for them. I'm a Celeb, celebrity stuff is really popular for this audience, and then a nice upmarket ITV drama on there as well. But actually, if we look onto the 65 to 74-year-olds, we see that the likes of Vera, Trigger Point, which was a breakout of Line of Duty on BBC, and the Queen's Jubilee were in there for the top programming. Now, if I layer that in for 75 plus, you've got the likes of Ridley in there as well, and those upmarket dramas. So the point stands that these audiences, and this is obviously the extremes, but the point stands that we should be looking to buy these audiences differently within our TV buy, and not just be optimising towards 55 plus, and really dig into that when we're doing our TV plans. That said, we also need to consider as well the difference in their exposure to these broadcaster VOD services. They're obviously big focus for a lot of the broadcasters now because of the younger audiences, but we shouldn't forget about how efficient they are at driving reach for the 55 to 65-year-olds. Now, if we think back to that cost per cover chart that I put up at the start of the section, the point at which these broadcaster VOD services need to be layered into the plan is different from 25 to 44s, absolutely. But we shouldn't ignore these services, because as the E4 audience is getting older, so will the broadcaster VOD audience. So we need to move with the trend, this audience, as new people move into this audience. ITVX are obviously doing a really good job at moving this audience onto these BVOD platforms with the likes of Litvinenko and those sort of upmarket dramas, which they actually released on the platform before they put out onto linear about 6 months later. So that's drawing that audience onto those platforms. We also know Sky is really integrating these platforms onto its set-top boxes, connected TVs as well, and making these apps so easy to reach for 55 to 65s especially, that aren't the technophobes that maybe we would be led to believe. And then just finally from me, I wanted to address the point of sponsorship and how this is a brilliant opportunity for the 50 plus audience. As we could see, those reach figures for this audience are huge. So therefore sponsorship is a great place to build both reach and frequency for this audience. Now I put some stats up there from a brilliant study that Channel 4 did about some of the brand metrics that can be really noticeably shift because of sponsorship, but also the commitment and trust element that came through in a lot of Christian stuff that was missing for this older audience. Sponsorship unlocks a really great opportunity here for brands to build on those.
Brilliant. And then bringing that into digital, so we often look at online video as an extension of our AV plans. And we can see here, certainly, when we look at the difference between the age brackets we've chosen, that 75 to 85s, we get a decent reach against them for online video, more so than 55 to 65. However, there are some nuances we have to consider for digital. When we were researching a new financial product targeted towards people in retirement age, we found a lot of research to say that the older audiences prefer to engage with video content over written content, just because it's kind of boring to read reams and reams of guides on text online, and videos just a little bit more fun, So if we can lean in that with video, we can engage this audience better. However, it does a dual job, because we also see in the research that there's a healthy skepticism sometimes of the internet, and I think that's perfectly fair enough. there is a lot of rubbish out there. And in particular, there's a skepticism of data collection, which is something that we need to be aware of in digital more and more, because a lot of our digital strategies nowadays prioritize first-party data collection because of post-GDPR. We don't have that as readily, right? But then we've got this audience here who really, really hate it. So video can help with that element of building trust and engagement, that emotional connection, so that they may be more willing to give you that first-party data. And then if we click on to the next bit, so when we then try to think about how we target the audiences, bringing back what Rick said around about the different generations. So in digital, it's particularly difficult to put yourself in the mindset of someone from a different generation. We have grown, most digital planners and buyers are under 30. I'm 31 and I am old in my department. You know, that's what we're dealing with here. And the good starting point for us is to take these formative years and use that to build a starting point for interest-based targeting. And then what is really great with digital is because we have so much data and signals, we can actually allow the platforms to tell us. So if you find someone who is a massive James Bond fan or a massive Beatles fan, what else are they interested in? So that actually helps us get around our biases as individuals that are like 24 years old. We actually have data and systems that can help us. We just have to look out for it. And then looking a bit more into the social space. So this is actually a really key platform for reaching our audience. In particular, a lot of people today have talked about how people, older people are often portrayed as lonely. And that can't be further from the truth in a lot of cases. And we've certainly seen it in our research into the property market recently. People are looking for homes when they're buying their last homes. They're looking for homes with big spaces for socializing, for bringing their family over, for meeting neighbors, for socializing with friends. And this bears out in the fact that they are really strong users of social media as well. Oh, going the wrong way. I think everyone's made that mistake today. And then if we dig down into social media a little bit, I'm telling you nothing new here. Facebook is still king for this older audience. And when we, oh goodness, I've done it twice. But when we look at the numbers, we're looking at sort of like 12 million. This is not negligible. This is a really efficient way to reach a 55 plus audience. What is interesting to see is this 75 plus audience here is definitely growing and will continue to do so. Theoretically, social media platforms change all the time. Who knows? There may be a new competitor that comes in at some point. And we do see slight differences in their behavior. We see older audiences engaging with groups a little bit more. And we have suppliers like GivePanel who are able to access that space in a way that just your standard advertising in social media doesn't. However, to me, the really interesting bit is actually moving into the middle of this graph to look at TikTok. Now, this is a platform, you can see by the percentages there, it doesn't get fantastic reach at the moment. It is about 1 million people. So, not to be sniffed at, but not your prime place on plan for targeting an over 50s audience. However, there is an increasing, massively increasing trend here for everyone adopting it, not just this audience. And we're starting to see terms like Twilight TikTokers and Gramfluencers become more prominent as they take up the platform. And I'd never heard of these before, but apparently it's getting much, much bigger nowadays. But what really interests me as an individual is we've seen a huge trend with the onset of TikTok for people, for songs that came out 50, 60 years ago, become more popular again. They've been revived. There was the whole Kate Bush thing, Running Up That Hill, recently. And there are so many things like that because they've been taken up on TikTok. And the reason why I personally think that is interesting is because it feels like TikTok, as it picks up traction, has the ability to be more democratizing than some of the other platforms. If when that song came out almost doesn't matter anymore, and someone who's 18 years old can love it just as much as someone who was around when it came out, can that make it a place that is open and accessible to all? And to me, that is a really exciting thing and one to look out for in the future. And the last thing to mention is actually Nextdoor, not on here because it's a relatively small platform, but it builds on the point around about socializing, connecting with your community as well. There is a high presence of over 50s on the Nextdoor app as well. And then, sort of bringing it out from the platforms and looking more broadly at targeting in digital, there are two ways that you can actually look at this. Now, the first one probably sounds counterintuitive to what a lot of people have said today. I promise it isn't. It's a particular nuance of digital, but almost forget age. People are connected and defined by their interests and their values more than their age. So if you are targeting someone based on their love of wildlife, that could be more meaningful to them than targeting just because they're 50, 60 plus or anything like that. And you can bring this through in your messaging as well. And again, this to me is a really interesting lens to look at things because it helps you negate the problem of the generational gap as well. You just have to be careful with your messaging, because obviously, as people have said before, the tone you use with a 20-year-old does not resonate with a 50-year-old. So you do have to be careful with your messaging. However, the digital space is incredibly fragmented. There are so many ways to cut your audiences, so many data points, so many platforms, that to me it's really exciting to look at ways in which you can cut across those segmentations and target people based on what they're actually interested in. And building on this, there's also the massive shift towards AI in digital, using data points to inform your optimization, targeting the right person regardless of who they are, what they're interested in, and letting the algorithm take control. That is going to be an ongoing trend in the future, which means that segmentation may not be as important in digital. Watch that space. But of course, the other angle is focusing in on age. So contextual, 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 really important for this, similar to what Vix was saying with sponsorship and the different programming. Choose the right programming for the interests of your audience. Now, there are sites that you can target specifically, such as, I think, Older is Wiser, 50 Connect, that are very on the nose with the audience that they're going for. But there are other ones that you can use as proxies, like you can sort of use as indicators for wealth. We've talked today about how there's a lot of wealth accumulated in these generations. So how about people frequently browsing luxury holidays and that kind of thing? But the bit, as a digital person, that really does excite me is the availability of behavioral and data signals that we have. So examples of this are if someone is searching retirement planning advice on Google or money saving expert, I can use those signals to overlay any other signals I've got, any other targeting I've got, and infer that this person is most likely to be in the lower end of that age range. So, probably anywhere between 50 and 65, depending on the life that they've lived, and they're less likely to be on the older end. So it's, there are loads of signals out there that we can use to try and infer nuance in that 55 plus. There are also signals that we can use from social. So partners like Kloop can bring in signals of what people are posting on social. So someone posting about their grandchildren rather than their children, you can infer is in the older end of the age bracket. And I could talk about this stuff all day long. To me, that is a really powerful tool to work around the issues that we have in digital in terms of targeting this audience. So we've shown you that we have a problem in our industry with our ability to nuance our targeting, but we have loads of clever ways to get around it in terms of the context and the segmentation and the data that we can use. But really, the thing that we need to do is we need to push as an industry to get our systems to do better, because they have this data. This data exists. They just don't give it to us to target and use in a meaningful way. And talking about it, getting traction in the industry is how we can make this change and do better, because it makes zero sense that I can segment 20 to 25, but I can't segment beyond 65 plus on Meta. It doesn't make sense. And so if we talk about it more, change will happen one day. So yeah, thank you.